Alright, here's a question that should bother you. Why are we still reading a guy who died 2,347 years ago? Think about that for a second. We don't use ancient Greek medicine. We don't navigate by their astronomy, we don't build bridges with their engineering. But Plato? We're still arguing about Plato. Universities still require you to read him. Philosophers still write papers attacking or defending his ideas. What did this one person do that made him so impossible to ignore? Plato lived from roughly 428 to 347 BCE. That's before the Roman Empire, before Christianity, before pretty much everything you think of as Western civilization. And yet the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead famously said that all of European philosophy is basically a series of footnotes to Plato. That's not hyperbole. That's terrifying when you think about it. Here's what makes Plato revolutionary. He didn't just have interesting ideas. He invented an entirely new way of doing philosophy. Before Plato, you had wise men making pronouncements. After Plato, you had something different: systematic inquiry through dialogue, the written philosophical conversation that exposes hidden assumptions and pursues truth relentlessly. And around 385 BCE, he did something even more radical. He founded the Academy in Athens, not just a school, but the first real institution of higher learning in the Western world. It lasted for 900 years. Think about that. Harvard is 388 years old. Oxford is about 900. The Academy was operating longer than either of them has existed so far. But here's what you need to understand right from the start. Plato wasn't trying to give you answers. He was trying to ruin your comfortable assumptions. And he was terrifyingly good at it. Now, to understand Plato, you have to understand his teacher, a man who never wrote a single word of philosophy but changed everything anyway: Socrates. Socrates had this infuriating habit. He'd walk up to important people in Athens, politicians, priests, acclaimed teachers, and ask them seemingly simple questions. What is justice? What is piety? What is courage? And these people, confident in their expertise, would give him answers. And then Socrates would destroy them, not through insults, not through showing off his own knowledge, through questions. Just questions. Interesting. But doesn't that contradict what you just said about X? Could you explain what you mean by that term? Would that principle apply in this situation? Within minutes, these supposedly wise men would be tied in logical knots, contradicting themselves, unable to defend positions they'd held their entire lives. Socrates called himself a gadfly, an annoying insect that stings the lazy horse of Athens into wakefulness. The Athenians eventually got so irritated they executed him for corrupting the youth. Which tells you something important. Philosophy is dangerous. Real philosophy, the kind that questions everything, makes people uncomfortable. It made them uncomfortable enough to kill someone over it. Plato watched his beloved teacher die for asking questions, and he spent the rest of his life writing dialogues featuring Socrates as the main character, preserving and extending his method. Look at the 3 dialogues mentioned here. In Euthyphro, Socrates encounters a religious expert and asks, "What is piety?" By the end, the expert flees in confusion. In the Apology, we get Socrates' defense at his trial, not backing down, not apologizing, but defending the philosophical life even in the face of death. In Crito, even when friends offer him escape from prison, Socrates argues that it would be unjust to break the law, even an unjust law. This is the Socratic method, relentless questioning that exposes what we don't know. And here's the thing, it still works. Try it on yourself, right now. Pick any belief you hold confidently. Now ask yourself, why do I believe this? What exactly do I mean by the terms I'm using? Could I defend this against objections? Do my other beliefs contradict this one? Uncomfortable, isn't it? That's Socrates. That's what Plato learned. And that method of inquiry, that willingness to follow the argument wherever it leads, even if it destroys your comfortable assumptions, that's the foundation of Western philosophy. But Socrates' questions led somewhere extraordinary, somewhere that would change how humans think about reality itself. Okay, now we get to the idea that either makes Plato a genius or completely insane, possibly both. You're looking at this screen right now. You see colors, shapes, text. You think you're perceiving reality. Plato says, you're not. You're seeing shadows. Copies. Imperfect imitations of something more real that exists beyond what your senses can reach. This is the theory of forms, and it's the most audacious metaphysical claim in Western philosophy. Here's how it works. Look around you. You see beautiful things, a sunset, a piece of art, an attractive person. But none of these things are perfectly beautiful. They're beautiful in some ways, not others. They're beautiful today, maybe not tomorrow. They're beautiful to you, maybe not to someone else. Everything in the physical world is imperfect, changing, temporary. But you understand the concept of beauty itself, don't you? Not this beautiful thing or that beautiful thing, but beauty. The quality that makes beautiful things beautiful. Where does that concept come from? How can you recognize something as beautiful if you don't already have some standard of beauty to compare it to? Plato's answer: there exists a perfect, eternal, unchanging form of beauty. It's not a physical thing you can touch or see. It exists in a separate realm. A realm accessible only to the mind, not the senses. And every beautiful thing in this world is beautiful only because it participates in, or imitates, that perfect form. The same applies to everything. There's a form of justice. Perfect, eternal justice itself. Every just action in this world is just only insofar as it reflects that form. There's a form of equality, a form of courage, a form of goodness. And at the top of this hierarchy sits the form of the good itself, the source and standard of all value, all truth, all reality. Now, this sounds completely crazy, right? A separate realm of perfect, invisible objects that somehow make the physical world possible? But hold on. Before you dismiss it, think about mathematics. You understand what a perfect circle is, don't you? But you've never actually seen one. Every circle you've ever encountered, drawn, printed, manufactured, is imperfect, slightly off, pixelated, irregular at the atomic level. And yet you can recognize that these imperfect circles are trying to be circles because you grasp the perfect circle itself. The mathematical ideal. Or take triangles. The angles of every physical triangle add up to approximately 180 degrees, but you know with certainty that the angles of a perfect triangle add up to exactly 180 degrees. How do you know that? You've never measured a perfect triangle. You can't. Perfect triangles don't exist in physical space. Plato says exactly. Perfect triangles exist in the realm of forms. Mathematical truths aren't discovered through your senses. They're discovered through reason, through the mind accessing that higher reality. And here's where it gets really interesting. If Plato's right, then everything you think is real. This physical world of objects and bodies and sensory experience is actually the less real thing. It's derivative, secondary. The forms are more real because they're eternal, perfect, unchanging. The sensory world is less real because it's temporary, imperfect, constantly changing. Your body? Less real than the form of the human. This table? Less real than the form of tableness. Even justice in society is less real than the form of justice itself. Most people live their entire lives thinking the physical world is all there is. Plato says they're living in a cave, mistaking shadows for reality, which brings us to his famous allegory. This is the image that has haunted Western thought for 2,400 years. If you remember nothing else from Plato, remember this. Picture prisoners chained in a cave since childhood. They're facing a wall, unable to turn their heads. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, people carry objects, statues, furniture, tools. The fire casts shadows of these objects onto the wall the prisoners face. The prisoners see only shadows. They've never seen anything else. To them, the shadows are reality. They give the shadows names. They become experts at predicting which shadows will appear next. They think they understand the world. Now imagine one prisoner breaks free. He turns around, painful, disorienting. He sees the fire, it hurts his eyes. He sees the objects casting the shadows. His whole understanding of reality shatters. Everything he thought was real was just a projection. Then, and this is where it gets intense, he's dragged up out of the cave into the sunlight. The pain is excruciating. He can't see anything at first. Too bright. Too overwhelming. Gradually, his eyes adjust. First he sees reflections in water, then objects themselves. Finally, he looks up and sees the sun, the source of all light, all vision, all life. He realizes, the cave was a lie. The shadows were copies of copies. The real world is up here, illuminated by the sun. This is Plato's map of reality and human enlightenment. The cave is the sensory world, the realm of physical objects and everyday experience. The shadows are what most people think is real. The fire represents the visible light of the physical sun, which lets us see physical objects. But that's still not the deepest reality. The journey out of the cave is philosophical education. It's painful, it's disorienting, most people resist it. The freed prisoner represents the philosopher who has ascended to knowledge of the forms. And the sun? The sun represents the form of the good itself, the ultimate source of truth, reality, and value that illuminates everything else. But here's the twist that makes this story devastating. The freed prisoner goes back down into the cave. He wants to free the other prisoners to show them what he's seen. And what happens? They think he's insane. His eyes, adjusted to sunlight, can't see well in the darkness anymore. He stumbles. He can't predict the shadows as well as they can. They mock him. They think he's been damaged by going up. And if he tries to free them against their will? Plato suggests they would eliminate him. Sound familiar? This is exactly what happened to Socrates. He tried to free people from their comfortable illusions. They took his life for it. The allegory works on multiple levels. It's about the theory of forms. The cave is the physical world. The sun is the realm of forms. It's about education, the painful process of moving from ignorance to knowledge. It's about philosophy, the dangerous mission of pursuing truth when everyone around you is comfortable with illusions. And it's about politics, which we'll get to in a moment. But right now, I want you to sit with an uncomfortable question. Which prisoner are you? Are you chained in the cave, convinced that what you see is all there is? Are you the freed prisoner, struggling to see truth that others dismiss? Or, and this is the scariest possibility, are you one of the prisoners who would silence the person trying to free you? Because here's what Plato understood that we keep forgetting. Most people don't want to be freed. Truth is painful. Questioning your assumptions is uncomfortable. It's easier to stay in the cave, watching shadows, convinced you understand everything. Philosophy, real philosophy, is the choice to leave the cave anyway, even knowing most people won't follow, even knowing they might hate you for trying. And if you've grasped the forms, if you've seen the sun, Plato says you have a moral obligation. You can't just stay up there enjoying the truth. You have to go back down. You have to try to free others, even if it costs you everything. Which raises the question, if philosophers have access to truth that others don't, what does that mean for how society should be organized? Who should rule? What does justice even look like? That's where Plato's philosophy gets really controversial. So if Plato's right about the forms, if there's a perfect eternal good itself, what does that mean for how you should live your life? This is where Plato's metaphysics crashes into ethics, and the collision is spectacular. Most people think happiness is about feeling good. Pleasure. Comfort. Getting what you want. Plato says, wrong. Completely wrong. That's cave dweller thinking. The Greek word here is eudaimonia, often translated as happiness, but that's misleading. It's more like flourishing or living well. It's about your soul reaching its highest potential, functioning at its peak excellence, and that has almost nothing to do with pleasure. Think about it this way. What makes a knife good? It cuts well. What makes a racehorse good? It runs fast. What makes a musician good? They play beautifully. Excellence is always about fulfilling your essential function at the highest level. So what's the essential function of a human being? What are we for? Plato's answer. Reason. The ability to think. To understand truth. To grasp the forms. That's what separates us from animals. That's our distinctive excellence. And virtue, arete in Greek, is the excellence of the soul, the perfection of our rational nature. Here's where it gets interesting. Plato divides the soul into three parts, like a chariot with a driver and two horses. You've got reason, the charioteer trying to steer toward truth and the good. You've got spirit, the noble horse full of courage and righteous anger, wanting honor and recognition. And you've got appetite, the unruly horse pulling toward physical pleasures, food, sex, comfort. A virtuous person isn't someone who has no appetites. That's impossible. You're human. You need to eat. You have desires. A virtuous person is someone whose reason successfully governs the other parts. The charioteer keeps control. Appetites are satisfied appropriately, not excessively. Spirit is channeled into courage and righteous causes, not petty revenge or ego. This is what Plato means by justice in the soul, each part doing its proper job with reason in command. And when your soul is properly ordered this way, that's when you flourish. That's eudaimonia. But here's the radical claim. Living virtuously isn't just good for society or good for your reputation. It's good for you. It makes you happy, genuinely happy, not just temporarily pleased. The person who lives justly, courageously, temperately, wisely, that person has a well-ordered soul and experiences true flourishing. The person who pursues pleasure at the expense of virtue, They might feel good temporarily, but their soul is disordered, chaotic, sick. They're like someone eating junk food constantly. It tastes good in the moment, but you're destroying yourself. And this connects directly back to the forms. Remember the form of the good? That's not just an abstract metaphysical principle. It's the ultimate target of human life. The philosopher who ascends from the cave and sees the sun isn't just gaining knowledge. They're transforming their soul, aligning themselves with ultimate reality, achieving the highest form of human excellence. Virtue isn't about following rules. It's not about divine commands or social conventions. It's about perfecting your rational nature so you can grasp truth and live in accordance with the good itself. Now you might be thinking, this sounds incredibly elitist. Is Plato saying only philosophers can be truly happy? What about everyone else? Good question. And that's exactly what leads Plato to his most controversial idea, his vision of the ideal state. Because if only some people can grasp the forms, if only some people can achieve philosophical wisdom, what does that mean for political organization? Buckle up, this is where Plato becomes either a visionary or a nightmare, depending on who you ask. The Republic is Plato's masterwork. A dialogue about justice that turns into a blueprint for an entire society. And it's one of the most influential and disturbing political texts ever written. Here's Plato's central question. What would a perfectly just society look like? Not a society that compromises. Not a society that's good enough, but a society organized according to the form of justice itself. His answer, the ideal state mirrors the ideal soul. Just as the soul has three parts that must be properly ordered, society has three classes that must be properly ordered. At the top, philosopher kings. These are the rulers, not elected, not hereditary, but selected through rigorous education and testing. They've studied mathematics, dialectic, philosophy. They've ascended from the cave. They've seen the form of the good. And because they understand truth, because they've aligned their souls with ultimate reality, they're the only ones qualified to rule. Think about that. Plato is saying democracy is a mistake. Letting everyone vote is like letting everyone perform surgery or pilot planes regardless of training. Would you want a ship captained by whoever wins a popularity contest among the passengers? No. You want the person who knows how to navigate. Governance requires knowledge of the good, of justice, of how to order society properly. Only philosophers have that knowledge, therefore only philosophers should rule. Below the philosopher kings, the guardians, these are warriors, soldiers, law enforcement. Their souls are dominated by spirit, courage, honor, discipline. They don't have the intellectual capacity to grasp the forms, but they're brave and loyal. They protect the state and enforce the laws the philosopher kings create. At the bottom, the producers. Farmers, artisans, merchants, everyone who makes and trades physical goods, their souls are dominated by appetite. They're not capable of philosophical wisdom or martial courage, but they can work hard and follow rules. Their virtue is temperance, accepting their place, not wanting more than they should have. Each class does what it's naturally suited for. The producers produce, the guardians guard, the philosopher kings rule. Nobody tries to do someone else's job. That's justice, everyone performing their proper function in a harmonious whole. Now before you start shouting about totalitarianism, and you should be uncomfortable with this, understand what Plato's trying to solve. He lived through the Peloponnesian War, which destroyed Athens. He watched democracy descend into mob rule and execute Socrates. He saw how politicians manipulate ignorant voters, how demagogues rise to power through rhetoric rather than wisdom. His ideal state is a response to that chaos. It's an attempt to organize society rationally, according to truth rather than opinion, wisdom rather than popularity. But here's where it gets really disturbing. To make this work, Plato says you need some pretty extreme measures. The guardians and philosopher kings can't have private property or families. Why? Because private interests corrupt judgment. If you own things, you'll make decisions to protect your wealth. If you have children you know are yours, you'll favor them. So the ruling class lives communally, shares everything, and children are raised collectively by the state. There's strict censorship, poetry, music, art, all regulated to ensure they promote the right values. Homer gets edited, tragic plays are banned. Why? Because art shapes souls, and you can't have people's souls corrupted by bad influences. And here's the really chilling part. Plato suggests a noble lie. A myth told to citizens to make them accept their place in the class system. Tell them God mixed gold into the souls of philosopher kings, silver into guardians, bronze and iron into producers. It's not true, but it makes the system stable. So let me be clear. This is not a society most of us would want to live in. It's authoritarian. It's anti-democratic. It's based on a rigid class system. There's no social mobility, no individual freedom in the modern sense, no room for dissent. But, and this is important, Plato isn't necessarily advocating that we build this society. The Republic is a thought experiment. It's asking, What would perfect justice look like? And the answer reveals something disturbing about justice itself. Maybe perfect justice requires sacrificing things we value, like freedom and equality. Or maybe, and this is what many philosophers argue, Plato is showing us that the pursuit of perfect justice is dangerous. Maybe his ideal state is deliberately extreme, a warning about what happens when you take philosophical principles to their logical conclusion without regard for human nature. Either way, the questions he raises are still urgent. Who should rule? Should it be the wisest or the most popular? Can democracy survive when voters are ignorant? Is there a tension between justice and freedom? Can you have a truly good society without controlling what people think and how they live? We're still arguing about these questions. Every debate about meritocracy versus equality, expertise versus populism, individual rights versus social order, Plato got there first. He laid out the terms of the argument 2,400 years ago. And whether you think his ideal state is brilliant or horrifying, you can't ignore it, because he forced us to think seriously about what justice actually requires and whether we're willing to pay the price for it. Now, you might be wondering, did any of this actually matter? Did Plato's ideas change anything? Or were they just interesting thought experiments that died with ancient Greece? Oh, they mattered. They mattered so much it's almost scary. So Plato dies in 347 BCE. His ideas should have died with him, right? Ancient philosophy, interesting but irrelevant, buried under 2,400 years of history. Except that's not what happened. Not even close. Remember the academy he founded around 385 BCE? It didn't just survive Plato. It outlived the Roman Republic, outlived Julius Caesar, outlived Augustus. It operated continuously for nearly 900 years until the Emperor Justinian finally shut it down in 529 CE. Think about that timeline. The academy was already 400 years old when Jesus was born. But here's what's really remarkable. It wasn't just an institution. It was a model, a blueprint for how serious intellectual inquiry should be organized. The academy had a structured curriculum, mathematics first, then dialectic, then philosophy. It had communal living and shared inquiry. It had the radical idea that truth could be pursued systematically through rigorous study and dialogue. Before the academy, you had individual wise men and their followers. After the academy, you had the concept of the university. And the academy's most famous student? A kid named Aristotle who showed up at age 17 and stayed for 20 years. Aristotle, who would go on to tutor Alexander the Great and found his own school, the Lyceum. Aristotle, who would systematize logic, create biology as a science, and dominate Western thought for the next 2,000 years. Plato trained the person who would eventually challenge and surpass him. That's not just legacy. That's creating your own competition and doing it so well that both of you become immortal. When universities emerged in medieval Europe, Bologna, Paris, Oxford, they weren't copying some new model. They were reviving Plato's model. The idea that knowledge requires dedicated institutions, structured study, communities of scholars. That's the academy's DNA. But the institutional legacy is almost the least of it. Because Plato's ideas, those weird, radical ideas about forms and philosopher kings and the soul, they didn't stay in ancient Greece. They mutated, evolved, and infected everything that came after. Here's where it gets wild. A few centuries after Plato, a movement called Neoplatonism emerged. Philosophers like Plotinus took Plato's forms and turned them into a mystical spiritual system. The form of the good became the One, an ultimate, ineffable source of all reality. The ascent from the cave became a spiritual journey of the soul returning to its divine origin. And then Christianity happened. Early Christian theologians, especially Augustine in the 4th and 5th centuries, read Neoplatonism and had a revelation. This Platonic stuff? It fits perfectly with Christian theology. The forms become ideas in the mind of God. The form of the good becomes God himself. The immortal soul ascending to truth becomes the Christian soul ascending to heaven. Plato, who lived 400 years before Jesus, became the philosophical foundation of Christian theology. The same thing happened in Judaism. Maimonides in the 12th century used Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy to systematize Jewish thought. And in Islam, philosophers like Al-Farabi and Avicenna integrated Plato into Islamic theology and political theory. So you have this bizarre situation where a pagan Greek philosopher who never heard of Moses, Jesus, or Muhammad becomes essential to all three Abrahamic religions. His ideas about the soul, about eternal truths, about the relationship between reason and faith, they're woven into the theological fabric of Western and Middle Eastern civilization. But it's not just religion. Plato's metaphysics shaped science. When early modern scientists like Galileo and Kepler talked about mathematics as the language of nature, about discovering eternal laws behind physical phenomena, that's Platonic. The idea that there are perfect mathematical truths underlying messy physical reality? Pure Plato. His political philosophy haunted every utopian movement and every totalitarian nightmare. Thomas More's utopia, Platonic. Marx's vision of the communist state, echoes of the Republic. Even modern debates about meritocracy, about whether experts or voters should make decisions, about the role of education in democracy, Plato framed all of it. And his epistemology, his theory of knowledge, that's still the starting point for every philosophical discussion about what we can know and how we know it. Rationalism versus empiricism, the nature of mathematical truth, the relationship between reason and experience. Plato set the terms. This is what Whitehead meant when he said Western philosophy is footnotes to Plato. Not that everyone agrees with Plato. Many philosophers spend their careers attacking him. But you can't ignore him. You can't do philosophy without taking a position on Platonic questions. He set the agenda. 24 centuries, 3 continents, multiple religions, countless philosophical movements. And we're still arguing about whether the forms exist, whether philosopher kings would be a good idea, whether reason can access truths beyond sensory experience. That's not just influence. That's intellectual immortality. But here's what really matters. Not the historical legacy, not the institutional impact, but the questions themselves. Because Plato's questions aren't just historically interesting, they're still urgent, they're still unanswered, and they're still about your life, right now, today. Let's bring this home. Forget ancient Athens. Forget the academy. Forget the historical legacy. What does any of this have to do with you, sitting here in the 21st century? Everything. Look at those 4 questions on the slide. What is real? What can we know? What is the good life? What is justice? These aren't abstract philosophical puzzles. These are the questions that determine how you live. What is real? You're scrolling through social media right now. You're seeing curated images, filtered photos, carefully constructed personas. Which is real, the online version or the person behind it? You're watching news, but is it real news or propaganda? You're experiencing emotions, but are they authentic or manipulated by algorithms designed to keep you engaged? Plato's question about the cave isn't ancient history. It's about whether you're seeing reality or shadows. And in an age of deepfakes, virtual reality, and AI-generated content, that question is more urgent than ever. How do you know what's real? How do you distinguish truth from sophisticated illusion? The theory of forms asks, is there objective truth, or is everything just perspective and opinion? When someone says, that's just your truth, are they right? Or are there some truths, mathematical, moral, metaphysical, that exist independently of what anyone thinks? This isn't academic. This is about whether you believe in facts, whether you think some things are objectively right or wrong, whether reality has structure or it's all just interpretation. Plato says reality has structure, truth is objective, and you can access it through reason. Do you believe him? What can we know? Every day you make decisions based on what you think you know. You trust experts, doctors, scientists, engineers. But how do you know they're right? You trust your senses. You see, hear, touch the world. But how do you know your senses aren't deceiving you? Plato's epistemology is about the limits and possibilities of knowledge. Can reason alone discover truth, or do you need experience? Can you trust your senses, or do they trap you in the cave? Is knowledge possible at all, or are we all just stumbling around in ignorance? This matters for science, for education, for every claim to expertise. When someone says, trust the science, they're making a Platonic claim, that reason and systematic inquiry can access objective truth. When someone says, do your own research, they're often rejecting that claim. Who's right? Plato has an answer, but you have to decide if you buy it. What is the good life? This is the big one. You're going to die. Someday, maybe soon, maybe decades from now, you'll cease to exist. So what should you do with the time you have? Should you pursue pleasure, wealth, Fame, power, comfort, Plato says no, those are shadows. The good life is the philosophical life, the life aligned with truth and virtue, the life where your soul is properly ordered and you're pursuing the good itself. But is he right? Maybe pleasure is all there is. Maybe there is no objective good, and you should just do what makes you happy. Maybe virtue is a scam invented by powerful people to control you. Or maybe, and this is what Plato is betting his entire philosophy on, maybe there's something higher than pleasure, something more real than physical satisfaction, something that makes life genuinely worth living. Maybe eudaimonia, human flourishing, requires virtue. Maybe the examined life really is the only life worth living. You have to choose. Every day, in small ways and large, you're choosing what kind of life to pursue. Plato's question forces you to be conscious about that choice. What is justice? We live in societies. We make laws. We create institutions. We argue constantly about what's fair, what's right, what people deserve. Should wealth be redistributed? Should healthcare be universal? Should borders be open? Should speech be free or regulated? Every political debate is ultimately about justice, and Plato's question is still the fundamental one. What is justice? Is it giving everyone equal outcomes, equal opportunities, giving people what they deserve, maximizing happiness, following divine commands, protecting individual rights? The Republic forces you to confront a hard truth. Justice might require sacrificing things you value. Perfect justice might be incompatible with perfect freedom. A truly good society might not be a comfortable one. Are you willing to live in Plato's ideal state? If not, what are you willing to sacrifice instead? These questions don't have easy answers. Plato didn't solve them. If he had, we wouldn't still be arguing. But he did something more valuable. He showed us that these questions are worth asking, that they're the most important questions we can ask, and that philosophy is the tool for pursuing them. Here's what I want you to understand. Plato isn't some dusty ancient text you study because it's required. Plato is dangerous. Plato is urgent. Plato is about you. Because if you take him seriously, if you really engage with these questions, you can't just go back to the cave. You can't just accept comfortable illusions. You have to decide, are you going to pursue truth even when it's painful? Are you going to live virtuously even when it's hard? Are you going to think seriously about justice even when it challenges your assumptions? That's what philosophy is, not memorizing old ideas, not passing exams, but choosing to leave the cave to see the sun and to go back down to help others see it too, even knowing most of them won't thank you for it. Socrates died for that choice. Plato spent his life defending it. And 2,400 years later, it's still the choice every thinking person has to make. So here's my question for you, not Plato's question, mine. Are you going to stay in the cave, or are you going to risk the climb? Because that's what this whole lecture has been about. Not ancient history, not dead philosophers, but you, right now, deciding what kind of life you're going to live and what kind of person you're going to be. Plato can't answer that for you. Nobody can. But he can show you why the question matters, and why it's worth everything to get it right. Welcome to philosophy. It's going to ruin your comfortable assumptions. And if you're lucky, it might just change your life.